Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be on the Chopra channel this morning with two great people who I simply adore and not only admire, but I learn all the time from. My dear friend, Dr. Augustinus Bader. He is the professor at the University in Stem Cell Biology and Cell Technology in Leipzig University, and the co-founder of the Augustinus skincare brand that is now voted #1 skincare in the world. So I think that's quite an achievement, especially because it's backed by science and your 30 years of research. Deepak, I do not need to introduce you. This is your channel. But why I wanted these two minds to meet is because when I met Dr. Bader, many years ago now, 4 years ago, thanks to his CEO, Charles Rosier, they really had a vision, and I love visions. And when I listened to Augustinus explain that we have biological wisdom, we have this innate knowing that our cells can regenerate. It's just about how do we trigger them into the intention and how do we create that communication so the natural holistic environment can regenerate by itself. And there was a missing link in today's world because of so many factors. And we'll get it back into that. So when I was listening to Dr. Bader, I was like, well, this is consciousness. Ultimately, this is whole health. This is how we can create our relationship with our true self, therefore our innate wisdom through consciousness. So this is why these two minds are here today. And my first question, I'm going to direct it to you, Deepak, because you're going to take this to the next level, is what really, what is the correlation between stem cells, which has been 30 years of research of Dr. Bader, and infinite possibilities that you always connect to through the work and research in consciousness?
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you, Dr. Bader, for joining me in this conversation. I am honestly not a fundamental scientist. My work has been in the area of biology at a clinical level. But of course, when one is an MD, one has to go through all the fundamental sciences. So I've been interested in physicalist science for a long time as a medical doctor. I do realize right now there are competing ideologies regarding the nature of fundamental reality. Science, as we currently practice it, is based on monistic materialism, or we might say matter is the ontological primitive. So there's a physical world and everything else is a byproduct of that. So our biology is physical, part of the domain of matter. And if we have thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, desires, instincts, rights, fall in love, hate somebody, fear of death, all of this is a byproduct of the brain. Now, I do not subscribe to that ideology. It's very useful in doing science, very useful in developing new products, very useful in creating technology, including Zoom right now, which we're using, but still based on a false premise, which is subject-object split. You know, the subject of experience and the object of experience are two different things. So given that, my tendency is to favor another ontology. Ontology means the understanding of fundamental reality. And that ontology, to me, suggests, and there's a small group of people who kind of agree with that, is that everything that we call physical is a symbolic representation of consciousness, including our body, including our mind, including our thoughts. So for the last 30 years, I've been very interested in stem cells, of course, because As we know, stem cells are pluripotential, which means they have the potential to differentiate into just about anything. And stem cells are pluripotential in all species, plants, animals, microbes, humans, primates. And there's a unity of symbolic representations in what we call our genes. Genes being the symbolic representation for a particular mode of knowing and expression, starting with the creation of proteins. And if you look at stem cells, human stem cells, all you need is one fertilized egg, and it multiplies about 50 times and produces about 60 trillion cells in the body, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Just one cell dividing 50 times, you have a baby with 50 trillion cells, more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But then when you look across the board at other species, you see there's kind of a similarity. So 95, 96, 99% of our genes are the same as a banana, or not as a primate, as a gorilla or a monkey, but 65% of our genes are the same as a banana. And 70%, 75% are the same as a fruit fly, 80% the same as a mouse. There's a unity of life across the board. And these genes are the symbolic representation of existence, which is consciousness. Now, this is way too philosophical, but it, I think, has practical implications. Because when I became interested in stem cells originally, as even a student, medical student, we thought of bone marrow as the source of stem cells. Then we thought of embryos as the source of stem cells. Then we thought of, umbilical cord as the source of stem cells. I know a lot of people who are doing research on plant stem cells, which excites me a lot because plants, is the least violent way to cultivate stem cells. But, once we understand that stem cells are pluripotential, we can direct them for rejuvenation in the body. We now know that biologically there's a phenomenon called apoptosis, programmed cellular death. And unless cells die, there's no life. So every 5 days, your stomach cells die, so you have fresh ones. Your skin cells die approximately once a month, so you can maintain supple skin. Of course, if you're an alligator, then it takes a longer time. So that's why alligator skin is different than human skin. But everything recycles in the body, and it's programmed through apoptosis, programmed cellular death. Given that, and what I've learned a little bit about, your skincare adventure with this wonderful cream that I'm holding in my hand called the Augustinus Bader cream, you actually have gone beyond harvesting stem cells from any organ or tissue. What you're saying is that we can use some kind of product that could actually stimulate stem cells internally and bring about rejuvenation, which obviously happens through apoptosis. So I'll stop. I've talked a long time. I want to know the research that suggests that there are ways to stimulate stem cells from innate skin cells. Initially I didn't think that you had stem cells in the skin. Then I found out you had stem cells in circulation, liver, everywhere. So please enlighten us.
Thank you, Deepak.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deepak Chopra. It's my great honor to be now part of this presentation. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and also thanks to Gabriella who introduced us. Also, thanks to my friend and partner, Charles Rosier, who, as you said, started this adventure And the journey has been a long way. And of course, you realize that in the stem cell field, like in your own history, like a medical student you mentioned, you started with all these different fields and going from bone marrow to cord blood cells. And this describes a little bit the journey the world has been going. And I have been fortunate to be part of this journey. And there are thousands, millions, maybe even scientists and people think about it. What is intriguing me really is what you mentioned is the consciousness. The consciousness, I think that's the distinctive approach to this technology, which I have been working on, because I used a different term. I used to call it navigation, but I believe stem cells speak to each other. They have a consciousness. They screen the environment all the time. In a little bit, we might be able to compare it like a stem cell being a director of an orchestra and speaking to hundreds of musicians, and they speak back to the director. And this way the art is happening. The art is created. It's an interaction. And the level of consciousness in your words that you try to find is really a very fascinating way to think about stem cells. And let me explain what's different about what I started of more than a decade ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. It was a slow process. My background also was originally in the field of organ transplantation. I learned that when you transplant liver as a young medical resident, that these people, these poor patients, even though an organ transplant was a very, very helpful development, these patients still stay patients after the transplant. They have to receive immunosuppression. So you exchange one problem with another one, even though it is super helpful. It has saved the life of so many people. It is very beneficial. Then when stem cell technology started, or tissue engineering, were actually the Vacanti brothers at Harvard Medical School many years ago that had the idea to grow cells outside the laboratory, grow tissues. And I was fortunate to meet these scientists also at the time. And the field started in a way. Now the whole world went into tissue engineering, growing cells outside the human body. And I did this myself for many years, up to 10 years. From the 90s to the end of the 90s, I developed automation technologies to grow cells to create tissues. But then I had a kind of experience which I thought maybe there's something wrong with it, why we should do this, because the human body is doing it in a totally different way. So if I would cut my left hand by some mistake, I would never send my cells to a laboratory and ask it to fix it for me. The human body seems to be able to do this on its own. And the animal body, the plants can do the same, they fix injuries. But we have one human limitation, which is obvious in injury. If the injury is very large, imagine I would burn my hand and it would be on a hot plate and the cells would be dying. These cells would be replaced by scar tissue. So I started to ask myself, this is really strange. A small cut heals perfectly and a bigger injury heals with defective forms of tissue with this scar formation. So it's not only limited to the skin. If you would have a stroke, a heart attack, or break my legs and a bone fracture, and the distance is very large, the tissue gap is filled up with scar formation, which is non-functional. So I thought, why would this be happening? Genetically speaking, I'm the same human being, and it doesn't make any sense. And I think the difference is the communications, how the cells speak to each other is changed. So if it's a small cut, you have a small gap in between two edges, and there's a little bit bleeding going inside, and cells maybe releasing molecules from one side to another, and there are cytokines, inflammatory signals created locally. And all of these signals seem to interact, and you get a better outcome. But if the wound is very large, and if it would be burned, for example, the cells have been coagulated by the temperature, or the blood vessels have been coagulated, so signals your body would make in response to injury cannot arrive anymore. So if I cut myself here, I never get double skin on the other side. So your body knows immediately the site of injury response. So I thought maybe it is just a lack of signal. It's not a lack of stem cells, because we found and published this in 2008, all over your vascular structures, you have kind of repair cells, precursor cells, and I will go in more detail to mention what I interpret with the cells. They're not really the super perfect multipotent stem cells anymore, like you have pointed out in the beginning. That's what people looked into it. They're more limited, they're more differentiated, they're more terminally determined to do something, but maybe they have just a function if it happens in my brain to fix my brain or my skin, my bones or my liver or my cartilage. So there's a more local type of specialization. And these cells seem to react differently once we started to replace signals. So I've thought maybe because the cells cannot make the signals anymore or they cannot arrive anymore, maybe we should look at these signals. So instead of growing the cells outside in a petri dish environment where also people put in signals, vitamins, nutrients, growth factors, molecules, I just try to transfer this knowledge to the human body or to the animal's body directly. So replacing specific signals inside the human body seemed to help to accelerate the wound healing process or result in a higher quality of outcome. So there were very few anecdotal cases more than 20 years ago where people with severe deep second-degree thermal injuries or third-degree burns even were helped in compassionate use cases just by placing a signal. And we published this, was erythropoietin at times. So one of the signals, once you put it in a gel, you put it on a wound, it heals better. And so I thought maybe we can interpret this relating to the field of stem cell technology, that it is depending on three types of factors. One of them, it must be the activation. It's the inflammation signal. Inflammation may be a double-edged sword. Inflammation in current medicine is treated often with painkillers or in chronic diseases with cortisone. So medicine tries to suppress inflammation, but maybe it also has an activating function. I tried to study this, the activating function of cytokines, and it seems to be that cytokines seem to address a specific type of cell in the vascular structure, which is this type of fibroblast almost, which may have a repair function in case of need. So there's a kind of awakening signal, which seems to be inflammation, but only fresh inflammation, fresh signals. And once you bring in a second group of signal, which I started to call a boosting signal, it seems to be a permissive signal at the moment of injury. And this, one of these molecules was this erythropoietin, and we published this already. So once you bring these two molecules together, the stress from the cytokine activation seems to be going down, and the cells do not change their phenotype anymore. They do not become fibroblasts so much and just stay as they are. And maybe then they may need a third group of communication signal, which is specific to the microenvironment where the injury has happened. So if the skin is injured here, the neighboring cells would also make specific molecules which are tissue specific. In the brain, I also have tissue-specific signals. And once these three groups come together, and I call it an activation, boosting, a commitment signal, these precursor cells orchestrate a repair process, which leads to a higher quality with less scar formation healing process. This was the initial hypothesis when the research started and all this field was going on. And then I tried to, of course, developed a theory about why we age. And you see that there's the switch coming on. Instead of accepting or saying we do not have enough stem cells, we should grow more stem cells, we should inject them, it is just a reduced level of communication. You might call it consciousness on the biology level of these cells speaking to each other, because it means consciousness, because it includes reaction. It's not just going on something, but there's a specific form of behavior of these cells, which you might even say they're autonomous in their decision-making process. They decide upon the microenvironment, they realize, interpret what they do. A little bit like, imagine you would drive a car and you're behind a steering wheel, but you look at a navigation map, but you interpret it. You're able to interpret it and you decide what you will do. Imagine a stem cell would do the same. A stem cell is interpreting the environment with the means of observation, leading to some form of consciousness in the sense that they're able to do something. So it is a change in behavior at the end, which is super smart, because I believe stem cells are programmed to make the best skin for you, the best bone, the best liver, the best brain, best cartilage in a healthy environment. So now if we translate this to idea of aging, and also genetically speaking, if you would be 2 years old or one day maybe 80, 90 or more years of age, genetically speaking, I'm in a way with the same genetic code where I started from when this egg was fertilized, the human being was created. We still have all this information, but our body obviously changes. But there's no disruptive trauma going on from the beginning. So I thought maybe something else, maybe there's something like an innate clock. And Walter Perpoli, who mentioned once he discovered a melatonin. I once met him. He always speaks about also a clock inside. I think we have a genetic clock which shuts down the access to our own repair signals as we progress with time. So people may call aging a disease, but I think it is probably just a lack of regeneration, because we seem to have a predetermined reduced access to our own repair capacity. But on the other side, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, once said, you cannot change the wind, but you can set the sails differently. And this, in a way, describes a little bit what I try to develop, was our genetic code is not made in stone, that this fate from this code is going to happen. So we have a lot of flexibility in it, which depends on our lifestyle, on our environment, on what kind of food we have. But maybe there's a next level of freedom, which is to give our stem cells or these repair cells what they need to do the repair process, independent of how long you have progressed in your lifetime already. Because genetically speaking, these cells still exist. And this, I think, was one of the limitations, or maybe even myths in stem cell biology. People think we do not have stem cells, especially as we get older. We need to get them from somewhere else. We need to transplant them, and people started to inject stem cells in some injury. But I think more stem cells will not fix the problem. It's a lack of consciousness. In your words, it's a lack of communication, what these cells are able to do. We are not challenging them enough. We're not giving them the tools to do this, because if you would get older and progress with time, as soon as obvious, diseases happen in many people. So you see that people may get problems with 20, 30, 40 years, rheumatism, Alzheimer, cancer. Many diseases come as we progress with time. But if you accept the hypothesis that maybe aging is just a lack of regeneration, we can reintroduce these regeneration tools, power with the knowledge that we have today in our human body to stay more healthier a longer time. We will not escape death. Apoptosis, total death, will happen one day. This is not possible to think about, at least with the knowledge that we have today. I think that's why we have to progress with time, and it is not coming back. But we have the potential to use these repair capacities with the human freedom we have. So it's a knowledge-based access, just like we have seen the wellness trend. Everyone now today accepts that we have to exercise, we should avoid stress, and we should eat good food. So my contribution to this field of research is the communication pathways of stem cells in a moment of injury. An injury can be trauma or can be chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation relates to aging. Paracelsus, an Austrian doctor, once said, if I could create fever, maybe I could cure everything. There's a lot of truth in, but he didn't know about stem cells at the time. So what I worked on was the activation signals, the stimulation, like you called it before, how you wake up your stem cells. And I learned it also from the pathology doctors. Now I was helping people with chronic wounds at some time. When the doctor comes or the nurse would come, and a human being with an open chronic wound, the nurse or the doctor would scrub on a wound and rub on it. So this is cytokine creation. So I think what we have to do in our human body, we have to change the inflammation profiles from chronic to fresh. But this by itself, like we have learned from the diabetics, is not enough. It's not just the awakening, it's what your body needs when the stem cells are awakened. So this is the research I was working on, awakening your stem cells by cytokine profiles, and that's what I try to develop in clinical work to do this and to give this repair tools, which is composed of the A, B, and C components. And one analogy, imagine like you're director of a bank and I'm now your assistant, and we would have a big metal vault in front of us like 100 years ago, and you have the primary key. And I would keep in a separate place the second key. And we would have to show up simultaneously to unlock the vault. So imagine you are first, you bring in key 1, but I would be delayed for whatever reason. The key would be inserted, but the system would recognize something's missing and the alarm would start. This alarm is inflammation. And the second key in a way shuts down the alarm and it opens the doors to your stem cells. And those repair capacities, which are not multipotent, totipotent cells anymore, but specific repair specialized cells. And let me give you one more analogy to explain why specialization for stem cells for us is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. Because when we started research, everyone only thought the multipotency is the holy grail, you know, with the induced pluripotent stem cells or totipotent stem cells. But I think it's actually a little bit like a disadvantage. So imagine one profession, someone becomes a neurosurgeon, someone becomes an architect, someone becomes a carpenter, a highly specialized person in their field of work. And these people are not mutually exchangeable. But imagine I would have studied to be in a different profession after many, many years working, getting some experience. I could do something and I can never do what you are doing. So you are also super specialized in your field with all the theories you have developed. But imagine many, many years ago, we have more freedom. But developing this specialization for stem cell is an advantage, and people have for a long time considered terminal differentiation of stem cells or differentiation like a narrowing of potentials. But in reality, the experience these cells have acquired in the narrowing down is an advantage. So imagine like you have a car of brand A or brand B or brand C. You would bring brand A to brand C, the garage, to fix it. This engineer may have a need for more time to look up the textbooks and look up the software and maybe even lacking the tools to fix brand A. So I think the stem cells in our skin or the repair cells have a high form of specialization and they have a specific need, which relates to the local area, which is different from other parts of the human body. So once you accept this hypothesis that we have a need for specialization, that's an advantage, that more stem cells will not help more. And we have stem cells a long time, all our life, at least in abundance. We seem to have billions that just sit everywhere. There's no need for cell culture anymore. And this was the big switch that I did about 15 years ago. I totally gave up. When my first work, and we was trying to develop a artificial liver, and I had a problem to grow a kilogram of liver cells in it. So this was the time, fortunately, when people started to think about stem cells. So and what Gabriella pointed out, it's the innate technology, the innate wisdom, the innate mechanisms that we may be able to work on to help us to stay more healthy a longer time. And maybe some people might call it rejuvenation, but basically it is just an assistance in our innate repair processes. Because for example, your skin, if it's young, it is more elastic. The cells in the fibroblasts and vascular structures are programmed to make a repair process, and they would automatically create elasticity, and they would not make collagen fiber when they start the remodeling. And you pointed out the lifetime of the skin is about 4 weeks. So when this process is going on automatically, you can in a way navigate your stem cells to do this or this. If you leave them alone and you give them, imagine I would be 60 years old, 70, 80, 90 years old, and we have this innate genetic clock which shuts down the access to our repair possibilities, but I would know what these cells need. So why not give it to them? And And there's one thing I have to point out, there's no activation needed because this remodeling is happening all the time autonomously. So or imagine you would go now to a very warm country where you have a lot of sun, maybe in Florida now, or maybe in Los Angeles where Gabriella is, there's a lot of sun. And this activation is in your daily life already enough if it's well dosed. There's a little bit activation, but what we do not seem to get is the access to these repair molecules. But in intact skin, these cells would take up amino acids. They would be able to make these molecules on their own if they're activated. So it's in a way just a research going on in a field like a consumer product that fortunately came out by the ideas of Charles Rosier. He once said, if you can help people with burned skin and nobody's really interested to develop this, and of course it's a long way to go and it costs many, many millions of whatever currency. One day have something that people can test, use it on your own, and maybe it will help us to develop this medical side. And the difference between the medical side and the skincare is very big. There's a massive difference because medicine means intervention, means activation and stimulation and the development of treatment protocols. In a skincare product, there's no stimulation, there's no activation, there's nothing. It's just a little bit like a cooking recipe. And imagine in the city you live, there's a famous chef, and you would go to the restaurants if they're hopefully open, soon already open, you go there. And if the chef has access to amazing best ingredients, the knowledge, the know-how of this person would be able to create something super nice. But if the know-how would exist, but the access to these materials would not be possible, the know-how would not help nothing. And this seems to be the situation of our repair cells with the human freedom, which Aristoteles pointed out. We cannot change the wind, but we can set the sails differently. So this in a way is the philosophy or the thinking behind the development of treatment programs, or maybe supporting tools to help us stay healthy a longer time by helping us to use our innate capacity. And one thing that I think is important to understand is it is a switch from having more cells or creating a tissue, which is just a replacement of organ transplantation. So we would create something, we can automate this, and then it's transplanted. Why not helping our own innate communication signals to be executed more properly in the human limits that we have?
Thank you, Dr. Bader. That's a very elaborate and very good, very succinct explanation of the science. As you've explained it, not many people will understand it, but good that we have this record. People can go back to this explanation, and there's a lot to explore. We unfortunately cannot go 1 hour on this interview, so I want to just take it to the next step where I think your product and your research might fit in. And I think it does. Thanks also for sharing the 3-step process that occurs, and the idea that you don't have to go too back into precursor cells, but even differentiated cells can be targeted selectively to different organs and tissues, in this case, the skin. So far, we're totally, I'm on board, and what I've said, you agree with so far, right?
Yes, right, yes.
Okay. So now let's take this to one other step. And, for 30 years, I've also been interested, particularly in human aging. Human aging is flexible, unlike the aging of other species, I believe, because we have self-awareness and, we know how to target our behavior patterns, both at emotional levels and physical interventions. So in 1980 or so, I got very interested in human aging. I had read previously that the average age of a human being in the Roman Empire was 28 years. And the average age of a human being in the United States in just the last century was in their 50s. Today, the fastest growing segment of the population in America anyway, and also in Europe, is over the age of 100. The fastest growing rate. I'm not saying that centenarians are more, but the fastest growing rate of the population is right now over the age of 100. So the demographics of aging have definitely changed in the last 10 years. And a lot of that has to do with reducing infant mortality, vaccination, better hygiene, better control of temperature, nutrition, and so on. So about 1980, I put together a program which fortunately got a lot of attention because of my book, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, which came out much later. But, I was already thinking about this. And then I wrote another book called Grow Younger, Live Longer, 10 Ways to Reverse Aging. So I'd like to mention the 10 ways because I think what you're suggesting could be part of a very big anti-aging program. And as you know, at least from a point of cellular biology, we have things like the Hayflick limit and all, when we don't know how true they are. But right now, our current science does say Hayflick limit, and the longest living people that we know in the world have not gone beyond, that we know, documented, have not gone beyond 120, 121, some in very good health. So here are the 10 things I put together. Number one, changing perception of aging. And that meant three things. One is changing the perception of what it means to grow old. So in many wisdom traditions, to grow old is considered glamorous, actually. The older you get, the more revered you are, the more responsible you are. Places like Afghanistan, the Hindu Kush Mountains, the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico, where the elderly are thought to be custodians of society, their aging is completely different. They conform to that expectations. To grow older is to be more responsible, to have the biology of youth and the wisdom of experience. So just changing the idea of what it means to age. Second was changing the understanding of what is the body made of. What is the body made of? Is it made of matter? Is it made of energy? Is it made of information? Or is it made of consciousness? Now, symbolically, we can say it's all of the above, but the fundamental ontological primitive still remains consciousness. The closest we can get to that is what we call information. And so today, all the theories about consciousness from a physicalist point of view are about information, integrated information. And I think what you're suggesting with this product is integrated informational signals. And so that's very much fitting with the model. The body as information, but also as consciousness. Changing perception of aging, changing perception of what the body is made of. And the third is changing perception of time. Because if you metabolize time in a stressful way, then we start running out of time. All these deadlines people have, they actually accelerate the whole process of time metabolism, which enhances or accelerates aging. So that was my first template, changing perception, time, and that's where meditation and all this fits in, or even transcending time in the moment, from being aware of the contents of perception to the source of perception. Number one. Number two was deep rest. And so I put deep rest in two categories. One is deep sleep, which is deep rest, when our body renews itself. And then there was meditation, which does the same thing. We combine the two, your deep rest accelerates, this whole process of rejuvenation or what we might say self-repair, self-regulation, self-organization. So deep rest was second. Third was mind-body coordination, things like, now we know a lot about the polyvagal theory, yoga, singing, chanting, yoga postures, Tai Chi, Qigong. They all have very specific effects on the vagus nerve, which counteracts sympathetic overdrive. So that was third. mind-body coordination. Fourth was exercise, both aerobic exercise and some kind of weight training. Although when I started practicing yoga, I realized I didn't have to do weight training. I was actually doing that anyway. So anyway, that was fourth, exercise. Fifth was emotions. Obviously, if you're feeling hostility, anger, grief, guilt, shame, depression, is going to cause this, basically inflammation. And if you're experiencing love, compassion, joy, equanimity, more self-regulation. So emotional and social interactions was fifth. Sixth was nutrition. And in that now, in the past, I didn't believe in nutritional supplements and all that, my training as an internist. But now, because we know about adaptogens and we know about Ayurvedic adaptogens, which affect the microbiome, which is 2 million extra genes, I became very aware of the importance of good nutrition, maximum diversity of plant-based foods, but also nutritional supplements, or as I call them, nutritional complements, which affect adaptogens. And I would say that products like this, the skin product, fall in that category of complementary aspects to accelerate self-regulation, self-organization, homeostasis, healing, etc. So that became separate category, nutrition, but other complementary strategies, but as part of the whole thing. And then, of course, there is the whole idea of what is the role of love. Love not as a mere sentiment, but as the ultimate truth of unity consciousness. And finally, I found that if I hung around with younger people, I felt better. So that became my 10 ways. And I'm now resurrecting the 10 ways to create an anti-aging package, which includes all this. And I feel very strongly that, if somebody can actually immediately see the effects on the skin, less wrinkles, skin thickness, as you know, the biomarkers of aging include everything from blood pressure to bone density to skin thickness, to inflammatory responses, to self-regulation of the immune system, bone density, so many biomarkers. But recently we've been looking at telomerase enzymes, and we've been able to show in a 1-week retreat a 40% increase in telomerase just by incorporating these 10 aspects in our anti-aging program. So if you think that, this has a future, part of a larger anti-aging program that brings us closer to the understanding that actually, and you mentioned 2-3 things which are very important. Totipotentiality is different than pluripotentiality. Being a precursor cell is not necessarily an advantage. A differentiated cell could be given the right signals. So these are very interesting insights that fit in with the total understanding that aging is reversible, that aging can be delayed, that we can have a healthy health span in addition to a healthy lifespan, that people don't have to die of chronic disease, that actually the ideal way in the yogic tradition was Mahasamadhi by choice. And probably that happens through some kind of induced cardiac arrhythmia, totally as a choice. That's my little spiel on the anti-aging program. And what I'd like to do in the remaining 5-6 minutes is first tell me if you agree with this total philosophy. Secondly, let's ask Charles to make a couple of comments. And then thirdly, let's ask Gabriella to conclude for us. Because if we go over 1 hour, we can't post this on social media. So first of all, let me ask you, what do you think of this holistic anti-aging program?
Actually, Deepak, I think it's very amazing. And what I really like what you said is the reversibility. And this is the key point. And I can contribute a little bit on the thoughts on reversibility by the remodeling concept. because remodeling means reversibility, and we see this in the skin, we see this in the body. Everything is reversible by this technology. And we do not have to die of diseases like maybe if we do not intervene, there's a chance. I think it gives hope, at least for development, for more research. But reversibility is the key to healthy progression of time. I don't even call it aging, a more healthy progression of time, healthy aging, because it's reversible. Because remodeling happens depending on a tissue. The skin, 4 weeks, and other tissues remodel faster. So once you know how modeling works, how remodeling is done, you can intervene by this type of supplement idea, or just by tailoring them to your stem cells needs. And I think this has been totally neglected. And maybe the outcome of the stem cell research of today, once we're able to bring it to our innate potential, like the big fraction, what's like you mentioned, bringing these billions of cells. It's a massive capacity. It's the biggest factory. It's nothing can compare to this. So once we understand a little bit more, the remodeling idea, which we are not made of stone, we are not made of metal, we are not the same human being tomorrow. So we have a chance to interact positively, but also negatively. And this is why your theory on bringing all this together is crucial, is important. Help us.
Then we are on board. Then we are on board, and then let's start. I've been experimenting with myself, and and I don't, I differentiate between chronological age, biological age, psychological age, and spiritual age. And spiritual age, of course, is timeless mind and ageless body. So I'm on board with your program. And Charles, do you have any comments before we are forced to conclude this conversation, which has been very enlightening, and we can continue maybe even a series on anti-aging as we move forward. So Charles, can you
appear
from the unmanifest into the manifest?
Yes, thank you both for your time and this exchange. I was actually very much looking for it, because I think that what comes out and what is really what we felt with Gabriella, you have in common, is that I think both of you are really forces behind the fact that the inner doctor is very strong. And I think that's very modern. That's what people are coming to nowadays. So whether it's through Professor Bader approach, which is about, again, the communication signals of our stem cells, or all the 10 anti-aging pillars that you described, Deepak, and I mean, all of this is basically epigenetic. It's positive influence on your genetic code, and it's basically saying the human body is an incredible entity, machine, and we have to be humbled by it, and we obviously do not master or control everything, as you said, whether it's consciousness, information. But I think both of you have this humble approach to say, this is an incredible gift, and there are ways to empower, that body to work in a more optimal way. And I think it's a very common approach you both have. So I'm very happy about this conversation today.
Thank you, Charles. And so, Gabriella, we have about 3 minutes before we are forced to conclude. So any concluding remarks? What's your vision on the idea of rejuvenation for the future?
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Augustinus. Thank you, Charles. I want to conclude with one thing, maybe, is that I do feel that there is, in today's world, there is so much conflict and confusion, whether it's what we need to do, whether it's political, whether it's our own survival with, for example, the virus that is mutating as we speak. I think here it's where this conversation gives hope, but it's practical hope, meaning we can take the power back into how we steer the wheel of our lives. How do we infuse our lives with consciousness, but intentional direction? So it's not that we're on a freeway and it's chaotic. We can actually create very simple structures in our lives to not only empower our general well-being, but empower our outcome and what do we want for the world. Because ultimately, if we're talking about reverse aging and being around here as a human species, then there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is maybe to solve the great mystery of why we do have these illnesses around, why there are viruses popping up now. What can we do to not only sustain ourselves as humanity itself? And maybe this is the way, and it could probably be a more compassionate way, because when we're focused on well-being, we ultimately create the ultimate relationship with the love story with ourselves. And I think that love story with ourselves becomes the extension with the love story of humanity. And so that everyone can find a form of peace, and that encapsulates total well-being.
Thank you, Gabriella. And that's a beautiful way to conclude, and onward.
Onward.
The program.